Kurt, are you all ready?
Yep.
Ellie, you set? All right. Welcome to the July mid-month meeting of the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Commission. It's a hybrid meeting. Ellie, would you walk us through the rules of the meeting?
Yep, I'm Ellie Mullins, planner, and I will be helping to facilitate the Zoom video portion of the meeting. I'll work alongside the vice chair, or I guess the chair today, to facilitate the meeting proceedings. I have a few housekeeping items for this hybrid meeting. The meeting is being recorded and broadcast on the city's YouTube channel and cable channel 25. Please remember to mute yourself during the meeting when you're not speaking. The chat function for this public meeting is disabled. All chats will go directly to me. Unless you are participating during the meeting, please turn your video off. This allows the active video participants to be seen on screen. You'll still be able to hear the meeting. When you are participating, please turn your video on. If you have any trouble, you can send a chat to me. The city reserves the right to mute people or turn individual videos off to minimize distractions during the meeting. And now I'll turn the meeting back over to the chair.
Thank you so much. This is Gary Rexrode. I'm sitting in for Prasant Duvar, who's out on a great vacation. He's joined us via Zoom, but just asked me, because of his remote nature, that I open and close the meeting today. So happy to do that. Today we have a primary topic where we've invited Mr. Rob Richardson to join us. Mr. Richardson is, in this context, a contract employee with Douglas County Economic Development Council. And we had asked the primary reason for asking Rob to join us is to help shed light on, to help us understand the nature of development work that might be coming from the Panasonic project. What things, in terms of increased volume of normal things, what kind of different kinds of things might be there. Just help us understand what might be coming down the road at us, not for the purpose of leaning one direction or another on a land use decision we might make in the future, but just give us an understanding of the kind of things that might be coming. And then secondarily, from his position as, with his background as a developer, his background in planning work himself, and also as a representative of our community's economic development body, what asks they might have of us as we work forward. So just like to make this an open dialogue. And Rob, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Gary. Like Gary said, my name is Rob Richardson. A little bit about my background. I'm a planner by background. I went to KU a long time ago. And I spent the last about 20 years as a planning director in one place or another, most of it in KCK. And then the last couple of years, I was in charge of the development process, really to keep everybody happy. So whenever a problem arose, I got to be the fixer for the problems that arose in the development process. So that was very rewarding, actually. It's a lot better than being the planning director, because then you get to be the yes guy and not the no guy. Sorry, Jeff. There's better things in the future. During the course of that time, representing private developers or working with private developers, I gained a lot of perspective on the development process, and I always thought I kind of wanted to be a developer, and have done some family stuff, really minor family stuff. But last October, I started my own company so I could move to the private side again and do some of my own development work. But I'll tell you one little story about why I have waited so long to get into development. And back in the early 90s, when I worked for a law firm, we were representing a developer, and they were doing actually this was the second TIF project in Independence. So it's the theater project north of Independence Center, if you know where that is. And it's a 30-acre project, 330,000 square feet, 85% of it leased to national tenants for 15 years, $25 million project, $12.5 million TIF incentive. So after the project, the developer and their attorney took my wife and I to dinner at a nice place on the plaza just to say thank you. And I asked him, I said, so when you see this project coming together, it's a $25 million project, half of it's coming from the city, it's leased 5 years beyond what your debt's going to be. Why don't you tell Homart, which at the time was the nation's, maybe the world's biggest retailer developer, see you later and put that together for yourself. He's like, Rob, that looks like a really good project. It's the best or the second best project pro forma and project I've ever seen. I would never risk my family's future on that project. So when, yeah, that's what, I mean, and so there was a time when I worked for the law firm when I almost bought 3 acres to develop myself, just trying to get a lot for me out of it. In 2012, I almost left the city to start doing my own development work, and these things keep coming back. Well, now I'm older, the kids are gone, and there's a little more cash available to do things. So, doing it without debt seems like less risky to me. It's just how long do you wait for your interest, right? So, there's a lot of things in the development world that are that you don't see. So we're doing our first, my partnership I'm in, we're doing our first project, and it's under 5 acres, but just to get through the property purchase, get plans drawn, get it submitted, you're about a year to get to preliminary approval before you start spending real money on hard construction plans. But your carry cost on that little project is probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $200,000. And so when you look at where you're going to spend that money and how you're going to spend that money, there's an opportunity cost there, right? Because you can go somewhere where you can do that, and the city time of that project is 3 to 8 months, or you can go somewhere where it takes longer, but you're paying interest on that money. And so there's a cost to that. And how long are you willing to wait for that? What is the reward for having that money out there, and what's the risk, and what does that do to your internal rates of return on your pro forma? And so those are all things that people consider when they go into projects. I do a lot of scouting work, so I spent 10 days at Bartle with one of the city's leading development attorneys who's on our commissioner team, and he said that when I have clients come in from out of town and they want to do something in a certain very large city in our metro area, like I say, if you can do it anywhere else, do it there, do it somewhere else, because it just takes too long. Whether it's the public process or the internal review of the plans by the staff, it just takes too long. And if you can go 3 miles away and do the same thing, you're going to be up and running a lot faster. And so these are things that I hear, and as planning directors, I'm sure Jeff gets, we took too long, you're taking too long, why, that rule's done, whatever. Well, part of what I look at is that, and this goes back to being a consultant, every time we did any work for somebody, we would say, well, the first thing we had to do is read the code that we're going to be dealing with, right? I don't think enough people do that anymore, because you have to know what you're submitting to. And if you submit a set of plans to the city that don't meet their code, well, you should expect that you're not going to have a very happy or fun process in that, because they're going to tell you that at some point. Why wait for them to tell you if you already know? And just, if you don't like that rule, apply for a variance, go somewhere else. It's a free country. You can go spend your money wherever you want, right? So, there's a lot of things in the process that when you look to, as a developer, who are you going to employ to do your plans? What are they going to do? What is their job? Why are they submitting something that doesn't meet the rules? Sometimes there's honest mistakes, right? I've been a planning director. I have clients in my former city, and sometimes the new planning director and I don't read the same rule the same way. I resist saying, well, I wrote that. I know what the intent was, but there's still things like that in the development process. So there's really no surety in that. And I say that because when you all have people come before you, and they might be a very wealthy person, there's still a risk involved in that. And so when we've gone to private equity to say, how would you do a deal with us to buy our product? They said, well, if you want the money up front, it's a 20% IRR. If you want to build it up, and then sell it to us, it's a 15% IRR. And that's what they have to get for their sale price. And it's interesting, because I always thought, well, I'm trying to make that kind of money. Well, you can't both do that, right? So you got to figure all the numbers out to make that work. But I heard something yesterday that kind of made me understand this. So there are many millionaires made in real estate, and probably more millionaires made in real estate than anything else in the U.S. The billionaires are all made in private equity money. You know why? Because they get 20%. Your money doubles every 3.5 years, I think, if you make 20% interest. So it's easy to turn the zeros when you do that. But there's also a risk involved. during the recession in KCK. There's one subdivision I'm not sure about, but every other subdivision went back to the bank but one, and that one didn't go back to the bank because the developer traded everything else to keep that one. And that was a story everywhere in the metro area but some Johnson County communities. And then when we started coming out of the recession, there were offers on, so say before the recession, you had $35,000 or $40,000 in a lot to develop that lot. They were being fire sold for $3,500 to $5,000 a lot later in the recession, just to get them off the bank books, right? They'll eat the loss and get them off the book and start again. So there's a lot of risk in that. And so that's kind of the lens that I view stuff with. And I've worked with a lot of the big developers in Kansas City, the ones that, you know their names, they make a lot of money, they do a lot of projects. And you would perceive them to be very wealthy people. But when you look at the analysis that they do on each project, right now you can get 4.75% high yield savings account money on the internet, right, from one of the internet banks. So that's, if you can do that with your money and that's safe, it's FDIC insured, what do you have to make to spend the risk? And that's where these people come up with, the higher interest rates and the higher rates of return that they need to make. And that's why they'll say, well, I can't do that project. It's not worth the risk, because all these projects have risk. And I think from the mid 80s through 2007, development was pretty easy and pretty good, and people were blowing and going, and everybody thought they could make money at it. And then the recession happened, and everybody's kind of put the brakes on and really looked at what is the risk again. So let's talk about Panasonic.
Yeah, just as you close out of that, I think it's good to understand the developer's perspective. One of the things that we have to, as a planning commission, keep separate is any individual benefit risk calculation they might be having. As members of the community, it's nice to know that, but we have to keep that separate from just the land use decision, and then through the lens of decision-making criteria that's there. So maybe not right now, but at some point I'd love to, I don't want to keep us away from Panasonic, but I'd love to understand if how the decision-making criteria that we use to make those yes or no decisions, which absolutely has nothing, there's no part of it that calculates an investor's risk.
Right.
If those items make sense historically to you, and if there should be improvements, what those should be.
Okay. So Panasonic's happening. I mean, I know like this time last summer, it had been announced, but people weren't really sure. Well, the pad is complete for the building. The steel's going up. They're trying very hard to get it to where they can enclose it.
They poured a lot of cement out there.
A lot. Yeah. They're still doing some final grading things, but the grading's mostly done. So they're putting up steel and getting, doing that. They've hired somewhere probably between 30 and 90 people so far. They're higher level folks for the factory. They won't start really hiring. They'll probably hire somewhere under 1,000 in the next 12 months, and then they will hire the 3,000, kind of line employee technician workers and things, probably starting in October of 24 based on their current plan, and that'll take them, probably 12 to 18, maybe a little bit longer months to hire all those folks. And this is just Rob's perception, and I think the perception of the EDC, when people heard they were building better batteries for Tesla, I think we all thought they were building a Tesla battery pack. And they're really just building the 25 millimeters wide, 70 millimeters tall.
Looks like a big AA.
It looks like a big AA battery, but they will build more than 1 billion of them a year out of that plant when it's fully operational.
Staggering.
And so where we thought there would be a battery pack that had, 100, 200 components to it, it has 7 to 9. It has a top and a bottom. It has a case. It has a tab that connects the top and the bottom, and it has an anode and a cathode paper inside of it. So you say simple, it's not very simple. The chemical makeup of the anode and cathode are very important, and the precision of this is very important. But the number of other suppliers that are coming in directly for this is probably not in the 60 or 70 range like we thought. It's in the tens. It's not in the hundreds, it's in the tens. But we're on the map now. So if you Google anything related to automotive EV battery, we show up. We are on the map as a under construction facility, and that gets people's attention. There are, obviously in Michigan, there's a lot of EV work going on, Kentucky, Tennessee, Georgia. We have this one in Kansas. There's likely going to be one in Oklahoma. There's one in Texas, obviously Nevada, Tucson. So they're kind of popping up all around. But people understand that from a workforce perspective, there's a turnover, and we have a large industrial base in Kansas City metro area already, but this will help that base. And if people leave the Panasonic plant, they're going to be highly trained industrial workers, and that is going to be an incredible asset for us over time as a community to have that base of industrial knowledge here that will help grow other industries. And we have had other people come in already that are support folks for Panasonic looking for space in Lawrence. I don't think any of that's signed yet. I don't think anybody's made a big decision. I think the only outside the plant big decision that's been made is they're going to build their own 500,000 square foot warehouse. And I don't know if they've decided where to build that or not, but I think that's been done. I just haven't heard of the final location on that. But that'll be real close to the plant. It'll either be in Flint or in Astra or somewhere very close for that back and forth work there. So there's 4,000 jobs in Panasonic. They're projecting another 4,000 ancillary jobs just to support that plant. And we don't know what those are yet. They're very hyper-focused on construction right now and hiring an executive team. And as they get into what their actual, they have a good idea about what their needs are, but they haven't said we need 15 industrial engineers with the ability to, keep a production line going. We don't know that level of detail yet, but at some point we will know that and help them do that. We are actively marketing our Douglas County communities. So I work for the Douglas County Economic Development Corporation. So we represent Douglas County, Lawrence, Lecompton, Eudora, Baldwin City. And we are actively trying to make sure that folks that are coming into town for the factory know that we are an option. One of our fears as we started this was that if somebody came in, one of the 12 to 1,600 people that might come in to work in that initial 4,000, they come into Kansas City, they interview in Johnson County, they get a Johnson County realtor, and they don't even know Douglas County exists. We want to make sure they know that we exist and to ask, hey, what about that college town? What about the small town of Baldwin City? Or I want to live in a really small community like Lecompton, or I want to be a little farther out. I want to be in Eudora, not DeSoto or Olathe. So we want to make sure that they at least know to ask those questions, and that we have good schools and we have great culture, and Lawrence is a cool place to be, which it is. Everybody likes to come to Lawrence, even those of us that live in the city. And so we're doing a lot of LinkedIn marketing right now. We were going to hire somebody to do that, but it's very expensive to do that, thousands of dollars a month. So I watch lots of YouTube videos, and so now I'm kind of a YouTube expert on the very intro phases of LinkedIn marketing. But we have gone through and said, these are the areas of the country we want to focus on. So if you have an EV battery plant in your community, we want to talk to your people, if they're willing to relocate, if they're a job seeker, and if they're interested in EV technology and some of the related things on that. So you can pick all that out. There's about 560,000 people in our target group, and we get somewhere about like 10,000-ish impressions a day and 50 to 200 clicks a day. And if they click, they come to the EDC website where we have stuff on each of the 4 communities: the Board of Realtors, Home Builders Association, school districts, all the things you would think of, city websites, all the things you would think of when you come in. So we want to make sure they know that they can come here because, Lawrence is 10-ish% of the metro area. So we want to make sure that we get our
Yeah.
share of that.
Yeah.
And since it's so close, hopefully we get a little bit more. And so we're doing those active marketing steps for that. All the industrial related stuff will probably come through Commerce or KCADC. And so, Steve Kelly, he follows that. The ones that have come into town, we did not know were Panasonic related till they got here. They don't announce that coming into town. They just say, once they get here, they start telling you what they're doing. You're like, oh, this is a Panasonic project. So it's been a little hard, even to find who their suppliers really are is not an easy task. And so Gary and I went to Reno to kind of look into this a few months ago, and to the point where like, oh, that business over there might be related. Let's go knock on their door and leave a card. And I don't know, we did that to 30 or 40 different businesses, it seems like, and only one of them gave away that they were probably with Panasonic. One lady smiled a little too big. The other ones were very stoic. What are you doing here? Thank you. Goodbye. So that part of it's been very challenging, but we keep working to try and find new ways to get in and understand what those people want, what they need, what their needs are, so that we can say that this is how we can serve those needs in Douglas County. As far as Lawrence goes, in Lawrence Venture Park, there's some land left. It has hair on it, for the most part, for environmental remediation. You might have noticed in the CIP there's a lot of money in there for environmental remediation at Lawrence Venture Park to help make that land more usable both for MSO and for future industrial development, which is very good. But essentially you could have one business come in and then you're substantially out of big lots. So we are actively looking how and where we would go about developing another industrial park in terms of location, access, utilities, because as you all know, utilities kind of end at the current development, and some of them aren't adequate to extend yet, and so we are looking at the opportunities to where, it's kind of like not really any different than what a private developer would do. What's our cost per square foot to develop industrial land here, here? And that includes access, water, sewer, other utilities to make that happen. So we're looking at those things, and we're working with city administration, county administration, as we need to on those different projects. I've spent quite a bit of time on housing and the development market, and what do we need to do to make it so that people can build homes in Lawrence for existing and new residents. The property value increases have kind of made that discussion pretty easy. You all know what your properties went up last year. Rent went up $300 a month in Lawrence last year. And if you watched the CIP or the budget presentation last night on homelessness, and there was a lot of talk about homelessness and affordable housing, and how many people are on the margin or paying more than 30% of their income as rent. On those margins, if your rent went up $300, you're over. You're making decisions, and some of those people will be making decisions about the quality of the food they eat, if they eat, their health care and other things like that. So it's very important to make sure that we allow the housing market to function in a somewhat normal fashion, and it just isn't right now. There's no new construction in the market. Last year we built, I just think, just under 75 homes, just under 80 or just under 75. And I would say a normal market would be 200-ish. The good markets were a little over 300 new homes. And, it can't just be one subdivision, because that's one price point, maybe two, one style, maybe two. To have a healthy market, you need housing coming on the market, multiple price ranges, multiple styles, multiple locations, so that there's a choice. And when you have the choice in the market, then the demand levels out and you have a more normal pricing structure in the market. And so we worked with Melissa and Craig, and Jeff helped a lot in this analysis, I think, to see what does it take to really extend utilities, where does it make sense, where is there, this is something I've never seen in any other city in such a degree, people that just won't sell. I mean, and your limits, you're limited of where you can go because of floodplain to the south, and then what people will or will not sell. We've had people that were not willing to sell a piece of property in a city before, but there was always other alternatives, right? The alternatives here are much fewer in number, and so we kind of took those things into consideration. And getting utilities across the SLT, which is, there's a lot of ways to fund that, but typically those are all, when you cross a major piece of federal right-of-way, that's usually a city job.
Do you anticipate that there'll be more requests for annexation?
Yes. Jeff can correct me if I'm wrong. I think you've done 3 annexations recently. One at Iowa and the SLT, the Garber annexation, and then there was another one that was more still in the north, but that one had all the, it's kind of in between stuff, and it's just connecting streets and utilities and everything was there for that. Did I get that right, Jeff?
Yeah, I think that if I remember right, I think there's been 4, but effectively 3. In the capacity of what it works at. And then about last 5, you take out a couple of years where there was no annexations, about 3 to 5 annexations for years, about generally on par with where everything tends to line up.
And that's about what? It was 500 to 700 houses.
I believe when they rezoned on that one, and just I know the commission knows this, but for anyone watching, their annexation does not automatically mean that a project will move forward. So they may annex, but it doesn't require them to immediately go to permitting or platting. That land can be annexed for some time before it actually works. I think a great example is a piece of land that was annexed in the early 70s, and the city is still sitting there as a farm field. So annexation doesn't compel a development application immediately.
What was the north? I got the Iowa and the Garber. What was the one in the north?
There was one that was generally between Folks Road and Blazing Star Drive that is right along I-70, and then the other one was between, it's on 902 Road, but it's effectively between K10 and about a half mile in, just north of Rock Chalk Park in the north area.
Just trying to trigger my memory.
Straight north of Monterey, straight north of 70 and going west. And there's the one that had that Alden-Lecompton 10-acre set aside as the public benefit.
Yes.
Does that ring a bell?
Yep.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
So, all that to say that to poise a city to grow in a responsible way, you don't want to go out 2 miles and build a dense subdivision. You want your next subdivision to be right next to the last one. Sprawl is, if you think about it in great big terms, growing in Gardner before we had grown to Gardner was sprawl, right? I mean, because there's still gaps between the metro area and Gardner growth or something like, or in Kearney, if you go to the Missouri side, we haven't grown to Liberty yet. You go past Liberty another 5 miles out, and then you grow. Those are things that are sprawling. When you're right next to existing development, you're doing that next extension and preparing for that next wave. That's not really sprawl. You want to do it responsibly. I think one of the great things that the recent economy has done for communities is that, when I started in this business, probably 80% of all of the housing that was built was single family on 75-foot or wider lots. And 20% was attached or multifamily. And I think those numbers are probably going to flip-flop and stay that way just because of the cost of housing and what people can afford to buy. So what does that mean? That means you're going to have more dense housing in the new development. So you'll probably be more dense as you go to your next phase than you were in your, so if you do it, your next, say, 100 acres of development will probably be more intense than your last 100 acres on the edge because of those, just the economy and the way things have happened. But that means that you'll have more value per acre for taxation. That will mean that it's easier to afford to maintain those things over time, which I know is something that the city rightfully is concerned about. How does it pay for itself long term? And you're kind of in a catch-22 because if you don't grow, then you start hurting the people that you don't want to hurt in the lower income tier, and how are they housed, and how do they spend their dollar for housing, food, medicine, those kind of things. But you do want to grow responsibly, and I think that, growing out and doing the next connection where you got to go to where somebody will sell the land. So you may have a couple of spots in between that don't get developed just because somebody won't sell, but their children will. That's how that happens. And I've been in it long enough to see some kids sell those pieces of land that will never be sold. But that's, I think the city's in a good spot with the way the CIP is written to poise you to be able to have multiple developments available and multiple options and meet your current market and meet the additional market from anyone from Panasonic. So, and Panasonic might be a 10% bump on a new year, on a general year of Lawrence development in a normal economy. Maybe it's 15, maybe it's 20 if we do a really good job on this. It's not going to be like 200 a year. It'll be in the 20 to 50, and some of them buy existing homes. Some of them will want to live downtown. Some of them want a historic house. Some of them will just want to be in Lawrence. Some of them will want to be on a golf course, whatever. They'll all make those decisions as they come in, but it will enhance your market almost assuredly. But it's not going to be 200 a year for 5 years or something like that. But as the Astra Park grows, as Flint grows, as LVP fills up, there's going to be a steady increase in this. This is one of the biggest manufacturing upticks since the Industrial Revolution, really, for the United States. We've sent everything overseas for so long, and the recession's taught us to bring that back. And so there's a lot of manufacturing business coming. And it doesn't look this. I think April was the biggest growth month in a very, very in decades. And so that they don't see that really slowing down much, even with the economy, with higher interest rates and things. Any questions on that? That's kind of the Panasonic stuff. There might be one of the interesting things about Panasonic that I like is that they require their suppliers to be green. I mean, very green, the greenest. That's why you'll see people doing lithium recycling, cobalt, nickel recycling, and they're not doing it with heat. They're doing it with water and recyclable chemicals, so that there isn't a waste stream that comes out of the recycling process. They recycle and reuse everything, and that's number one. You can't use heat to refine lithium because it burns up. So you have to have another process to do that, and we have to be able to recycle lithium to meet the demand that we have in the country. So I think that's a good thing. So you might see some really interesting industrial projects that you think, wow, that they'll be, Panasonic requires their suppliers to be green, so they will be very environmentally friendly folks when they come in. Any questions on the Panasonic issues?
Is there any expected, or have you learned more about other businesses, not necessarily direct suppliers to Panasonic, but other players in the industry, other EV manufacturers as an example? 8,500 acres out there, there's room for more.
Yes, there is. There are no details on that yet, but there's definitely talk of a potential second plant, whether it's automotive, car manufacturer, battery manufacturer. That's certainly something that people have been talking about, which would probably be another 4,000 jobs with another 4,000 ancillary jobs that go along with that.
And each one of those has its own, if you just take the stats on Panasonic, brings its own addition.
Right. And this is, the Panasonic plant is huge. It's on 300 acres or something like that. It's 5% of the Astra Industrial Park. So as big as it is, at the end of the day,
Potential is just
yeah,
to become one of the country's most significant industrial developments.
yeah. I mean, that's it. I don't know the area of that compared to the industrial park outside of Reno, which is very, if you all don't know, you got to drive 17 miles across BLM land on interstate to get to this big industrial park. It's really odd. And then you're in the middle of nowhere, and then there's, there's like, what, one convenience store and gas station out there and a couple of hotels and not much else. People drive from Reno every day, or they get bused from Reno every day to do that. So they like this area because there's a lot of access. It's not a single point access. There's a metro area to serve it. And we have, one of the reasons Fairfax still has a General Motors plant is just the work ethic that we have in this area. And that is something that people value, and get to value more over time, that we are, Midwestern hardworking people, and there is a significant value to that in the workplace. I won't make any more comment on that. But we've all seen some of those issues and coworkers and our kids' friends and things like that make that a very important thing to someone making a location decision. And the state's been very generous on the incentive side.
Is anyone anticipating any increased requests for commercial development, not industrial, but commercial development along the K-10 corridor?
Yeah, it's interesting because, the retail market, I think, is still in a tremendous amount of flux. The amount of things that we buy by 30 seconds like this that we don't spend 30 minutes in the car in the store to go to anymore. I don't know how that's going to work long term. The office market is in the most unusual position it's ever been in, with companies trying to figure out who can and who should be able to work remote. Do we have to let them work remote, or they'll go somewhere else? And so the demand for office space is in an unusual place at the moment. I had a friend, he was a Sprint employee, but he moved to Minneapolis for another related business when the Sprint layoffs happened, and they had, I think it was 800,000 square feet in 3 different buildings in Minneapolis, before COVID. Now they have 200,000 square feet of office space, and everybody works remote, and they can all go in, but you don't know you just walk in and draw a straw for an open office. And so, I mean, those things are really interesting aspects of the commercial marketplace for commercial development. How are the buildings that aren't in use going to get reused? How are they going to be backfilled? It affects the value of those spaces and whether you can even afford to build a new space. If a law firm wants a new office, they're going to go build a new office because they make a lot of money and they can go build a new office. But if you're trying to figure out if you should, if I own a business and I need a new space, am I going to build a new space, or am I going to go take over somebody else's office space that I can get at, an incredibly cheap rent rate that's a third of what it would be or a quarter of what it would be if I built new space? There's all that kind of stuff's playing in the market right now, and I think eventually the answer is yes, but I don't know how long it's going to take us to level out. Obviously there's going to be convenience retail. You're going to have your coffee shops and restaurants and dry cleaners and whatever else goes along with a new area developing, but will there be new office buildings and things? It's kind of hard to say. There'll be some specialty built stuff. Even in the industrial sector, the money for spec industrial's kind of gone away. For a while, it was, if you could build a spec industrial building. And even with the demand in the industrial market, the interest rates and everything else have pulled that money back. And so you really have to have an active project to get a loan to go do that if you don't have private equity just to go do the speculative development. There's a lot in play there. I wouldn't, if somebody said, hey, I'm going to leave this open for commercial, this corner, and we may come back and build multifamily on it 5 years, but we want to leave it open for that opportunity, I would say that's probably reasonable. But I'm not making any predictions on the commercial market right now. It's just, there's too much wonkiness still coming out of COVID to make predictions on that.
Okay. Thanks.
I have a question. So you mentioned that one big business in the Venture Park would fill that space up. So the need for industrial growth area. But what is limiting the growth around the Panasonic plant?
There
You
really,
mentioned only a small portion.
well,
of
there
that is-
isn't, but it's in Johnson County, so we don't get any of that.
But I'm just
extra
saying, what would be limiting putting things there?
Infrastructure, electricity. Part of their plan is to potentially build a huge 3,000 acre solar farm or something like that. I don't know if that's the right number, but it's big, to help generate power for those users, potentially water supply. But they have, I think Water One can service whatever water need they have, but power needs for some of these big users, even things that there aren't people in, like the Meta project in North Kansas City, that's the big data center. The power needs of running all those computers, and it's just air conditioning and computers are significant. We drove by the data center for Tesla out in Nevada, and I think it had like 8 little mini substations around the building just to run the building. I mean, if you get in and you zoom in out there and you can go around, there's a building that's got like 4 little wings. If you zoom in, they all look like little bitty substations. So the power needs are on a millions and millions of square foot building that is generating an incredible amount of heat that has to
That
be
one building, I think, was 260 some odd acres under one roof.
Yeah. So those are things that could limit that. I guess at some point your roadway network might limit some of that, based on how many employees can come in and out, but people learn how to stagger shifts and get their people in and out to make all that work in industrial areas. So, I mean, there's not a lot to limit it out there.
Well, I was wondering, why would they come over here?
Oh, well, because Lawrence is cool. I mean, if I own the company and I want to live in Lawrence and I don't want to drive very far to work, I might want my business in Lawrence and save myself the 15-minute drive and let my truck drivers drive there. I mean, there will be people that want to live, I mean, just like the residential decision, why would you want to live in Lawrence and not somewhere in Johnson County or Kansas City or the Crossroads or downtown? It's what you prefer, what you like. And there will be people that make that decision because they like the location, the land, maybe the land is a better deal, maybe there's some other factor that brings them here. Maybe they have more than one client for their service, and it's nice to be close to the plant that's in Astra, but they also need to be closer to I-70. And so this is a happy in between. I think there'll be a lot of, there's just a lot of things that go into that decision-making matrix, and we're going to win some of those. Some of them we're going to win just because we're cool. Some of them will win because they like our location. That's the way it is.
I think the one thing I'll add to that is you also have a little bit of an inherency with Haskell and KU being here, and sometimes they value the proximity to higher education as part of that. Not just, that someone has three-phase power and water and utilities, but it's that proximity to certain skill sets or certain research that is going on, and that's a bit of a unique factor that we have. We're seeing that at Venture Park too.
Yeah. And I think that, as KUIP matures and you'll have people that come out of that want to stay in Lawrence. They'll start as a 1 or 5 person shop in that park, and they'll grow and they'll outgrow what they can do there, and then they'll want to stay in Lawrence. And I think that's kind of an incubator, so to speak, for those things. So there's a lot of factors that go into that, and the life of a city is a long life. It's longer than any of ours, and so planning for jobs in the future is something that will do today, and, I probably won't be employed by the EDC when some of those things happen, but for Lawrence to succeed long-term, they need to be there, and we need to plan for that, to have jobs for our people in the future and places for them to be, and who knows what the nature of those jobs will be, and, what they will be in the future. But if we don't have land available for them to come here and use as a resource for industrial purposes, then we're probably going to lose out.
So go back to that comment I made about, the decision criteria that we use. It doesn't, again, doesn't include benefits or risks of the developer. It doesn't anticipate those things. It doesn't include necessarily benefits for the community. It's really strictly about a land use.
Well, one of the criteria is related to economic impact to the community. And so that's not the developer's pocketbook, but what do we need to do for the economic health of the community? And, you all know what the golden factors are, I assume, from, I don't think it's intended that any one of those outweighs any other. It's looking at them as a whole. And is one of them enough to deny a project? Depending on severity, it can be. But one of them, likewise, should it just be one of the benefits that causes you to approve a project? Not most of the time, but maybe it can be. And it's a balancing act. But economics to the community are definitely a part of what you can consider, what the Kansas Supreme Court said you can consider in a zoning case. Now, how do you figure that? Is it purely on future tax revenue, or is it a broader scope of the health of the community and the economics of the whole community and how it works together? You all have to make that decision make your mind up for yourself. I think that it's easy to say, well, it's going to bring us in this much tax revenue. I don't know that tax revenue relates to the economic health of the community in the way maybe having a place for our community to live and expand, or have expand for new jobs, job growth in our community. The number on tax revenue is not necessarily directly related to the economic benefit of the community as a whole. And there is a benefit there, but there are some uses that it doesn't matter how much tax revenue they pay, they may not be good for the community, right? And so that, you've got to balance that as the way you all see that as a board. But you can use economics. And you really are, I think, in many ways prohibited from asking about the finance part of the development. I don't think you should ask if you're going to provide affordable housing, because that talks about who is going to live there more than it does what the project is. The who is going to be there in the future is not necessarily, unless it's part of the health of the community, right? If you need affordable housing, and that's part of the economic health of the community, then you might be able to get to it that way. But I'd be very hesitant to talk about that. I mean, as planning director, we never asked, sometimes people knew because they'd applied for incentives at the same time, so it's all in the public space, right? But asking what rent is going to be, sometimes a lot of communities ask that as a way to say, is it high enough to keep those people out? And, there are communities that use that question that way. So you have to be careful how it's asked, what the intent is, and how it will be interpreted when a judge listens to or watches you on tape, because they do. They don't even depose you anymore. They just look at the tape and see, I could tell by the tone of voice and what that commissioner's actions were that they were not taking this seriously, and that comment was sarcastic and inappropriate, and go back and try again. So that's how they look at those now.
So where I was going with my comment was maybe a little bit different. Part of what makes Lawrence, Douglas County is the values that we have. Mm-hmm. How we treat rural unincorporated with the same, value as we would increase density or, finding industrial ground, mm-hmm. right? And making those decisions together. So we lean on our comprehensive plan, and our comprehensive plan does specifically provide for housing affordability and leans us towards density for the purpose of, lowering our costs and infrastructure. So where I was going with my question was with that in mind, and our community having needs, so community being faced or there will be applicants coming to us. How can we help those future applicants understand what those values are, understand how this manifests in the criteria that we're asking people to apply to? I won't speak for anybody else, but just for myself, I would be reluctant to toss away the plan or the values or whatever because this is such a great project, and do something that is outside of what our rules, our processes provide for, even if they are maybe a little bit more burdensome than some. How can we help those applicants understand that so that they can come in as great partners in the community?
One of them is just getting to read the documents, has the actual money guy or project lead read those documents? Do they understand the city? Have their contractors, their engineers, architects, planners, landscape architects, financiers, have they read that? Do they understand that, where you're coming from? I think that's a big part of it for people to understand where you are as a community. And I also think that, zoning is on paper and it gives you rights based on what your zoning is. The plan is a projected future of that. And the plans can change. Now, I wouldn't change them every day for any reason, but there are rational times when it's okay to amend the plan because of whatever benefit a project is going to. And I've even had a couple of plans where we left it as mixed use open on the plan because so many things could go there. And what is right? So take the land that was immediately west of the Legends. There's 300 acres there. At one time, Lamar Hunt had an option on that to build a stadium there. He was never going to build a stadium there, but he got $500 million out of the state of Missouri to enhance his existing stadium. There could be apartments there. There could have been additional entertainment. There's a big, wide public right-of-way there. You could change that, and we had data center proposals. I mean, there's all kinds of things that, there really wasn't a lot of residential around there, and there was great road access, great utility access. We wanted a great project there that was great for the city, probably more than we wanted a specific thing there. Where the Cerner office buildings are on the east side of the Legends, or I guess they're Oracle, that now David Block just bought them, but they were originally Cerner office towers. On the original plan for Village West, those were an office. I went to Europe to ski in indoor ski domes because somebody wanted to build an indoor ski dome there at one point because of the slope, and it's on the way to Colorado, and that didn't happen because you just couldn't make it look very good because it's a big, tall thing on ugly stilts, and it just didn't meet the look that we wanted for that area. So, I mean, there's a lot of times where you can have an area that you could have a great project there. You don't really need to super define it up front. But, if you're next to you've got a half a mile of development and you've got 75-foot lots lined up there, well, that does set a different tone, right? You can't go build a lot of things right next to that without some kind of buffering and what I would tell people, if they want to do residential next to it, everybody wants to do more density. So if they've got an 80-acre project, they've got a bunch of 75 or 100-foot lots here, and they wanted 300 units here, but they put 150 units along here. Well, those people are you've been in planning commission meetings long enough. I don't want some of those people to have three backdoor neighbors instead of one, right? Most people, if you lined up and matched lot line to lot line there, they don't care what happens on the other side of the street, as long as it tears up. I said, if you wanted 300 units, but you're going to do 150 here, do 400 units and only do 75 here. Nobody will blink, and you'll get your project approved. There's ways to make those things work, and how you do a project, and how you do density, and how you do buffering to make a lot of projects work that may not fit everything exactly, but you can work with them, and the staff can work with them to get you something that meets the intent of what the original plan was and allows you to develop a great project that might not have been thought of yet. I mean, we were going to have land uses that aren't in the zoning code you're writing now. You know, that happens, and you're going to have to deal with those, and where do those fit in your plan? Those are, you know, very interesting dilemmas for a staff, because Jeff sees that, and sometimes if it's a big enough project, he'll see it in a meeting with Craig, and Craig will look at Jeff, and Jeff's like, oh, it looks like this is something that everybody wants to do, but it doesn't quite fit the plan. What do we do, right? And so then you got to work with you all to figure out if it can work or not. And I think that the critical thing for the development community is, will you entertain that? I mean, we be nice about it. I mean, you can have you can disagree and not have something done, and people feel like they were given a fair shake, and you can have them feel differently than that. And so I think, you know, an effective development process is predictable. It means you know that, you know, it's going to happen this way. It's fair, and you know, those are very hard things to come by in any city. But if you have a fair, predictable process, so if it's planned single family, it's zone single, you know, if it's planned single family, I can zone it to something within the plan that meets that, and I can get that development approved. I can do that in a reasonable time frame and get a reasonable result. That's a good process that's predictable that people will want to follow. If you have people coming in and it's planned for residential, and you say no to the zoning that complies with your plan after, you know, a year of debate, that will drive people away, because it doesn't make, you know, there's a lot of risk in the money. And, you know, I wouldn't put something in your plan you don't intend to follow through with zoning. And that makes it hard. And you know, don't go to tier 3 of the plan. You know, if it's tier 1, it's close. I mean, those kind of things.
Yeah, I would. I find this conversation very interesting. Thank you for coming. It's been very enlightening. A couple of things that I think Gary mentioned. Excuse me. I'm interested in. First of all, I loved your comment about I don't think people read anymore. I'm a professor, and I've been saying that now for a couple years. Like, please just read the syllabus, right? Read the documents. And so, in some respects, we don't have any control over that, right? If somebody has come, like that fairness that you're talking about, some of that has to do with like what people's impressions were and what work they did that was really on them to do. To be prepared. But I'm really interested in like what your office is doing to think about the value set. So you've mentioned a couple times that like Lawrence is cool, and I agree with you, right? I worked in Kansas City for a long time and always maintained a house here and made that decision because Lawrence has been my community for 30 years now, and I just had that feel, and I've tried to go away for other job opportunities, and it's like, nope, Lawrence is cool, right? It's my value set, and so I think the value set is really important, and so I'm just interested in how you think about that, or how developers should think about that. And it's very easy to think, well, Douglas County or Lawrence is hard to work with because they have more rules in place or more procedure in place. But a lot of that has been really systematic over decades in order to make sure that the value set of the community changes with the time, but also stays where we want it, right? And there's just a lot of values out there. And so it's interesting to me to think about when you're looking at these things. I do find like Plan 2020 to be really important. I find what the neighbors say and come and talk about to be really important. And so in your aspect of planning and helping people think about what our community is and being consistent with those values, like how do you approach that, and how do you guys think about, because my understanding, I have to defer to staff, but my understanding is, you know, Plan 2020 comes out of surveys of the community. The people have spoken about the kinds of things and the value set, that open space, right? And like a lot of important things are in there. So I don't hear that as much when you're talking about the economic development and the working with people and the things that we should be considering. So what would be your take on that? And, where do we go?
So I'm very much a neighborhood guy. I live in a historic house in a historic neighborhood, and when Professor Rockhill wanted to build one of his shoeboxes in my neighborhood, I protested. So, that's, I get that. And when I wrote our zoning procedures in 2004, we had neighborhood meetings, and that were required for our development. So, we value open space, and I think that none of that is bad. And I think developers should inherently want to do neighborhood meetings. They should inherently be able to be a little bit flexible in what they're doing. My thought was that if I read the neighborhood meeting notes and then I come to the meeting and I see what the developer says, well, these were the 15 comments that they made. This is how I addressed the 11 of those in complete fashion. 12 and 13, we kind of did this instead. 14 and 15, we just couldn't do. That seems like a good compromise, provided 14 and 15 weren't, nuclear bombs, right? So that I think there's got to be some give and take on that. And what I found was that if the neighborhood was irrational, the commissions would listen to that a little bit, and then they would approve the development. I think that the community values are really important there, and how they get manifested. One of the things I've heard about Lawrence is that the public process is rude and inconsiderate and impolite. I haven't witnessed that. I've been told that a lot, but there's not really a need for that. You don't need to cuss somebody out just because you don't agree with them. That's, leave that for Facebook, I guess.
I haven't experienced that either.
And so, and that's why I say I hear things, and I was here in grad school. I've observed from afar. I'm back. So, but if that's a perception, then it's probably something to be worked on. How is people's time valued? I love that you get to hear people speak at commission meetings. I would probably do the business that's on the agenda before I heard people speak, because that's the business. You got to hear them, but if people are there for an agenda item that's part of the real business of the board, it would be polite to hear that first. Not that the other isn't important, but it's an agendized business item. It's just polite to hear that before we go into hear comments about things that aren't on the agenda. Other city, it's just how your city operates and how you value that. You can't throw away your value system, right? But at some point, if your value system starts to have conflicts, like, Lawrence is very concerned about folks that are unhoused, rightfully so, more than any other community in the metro area by a long shot. And that's a great thing, because, we need to protect the weakest members of our community, because they're part of the chain, right? And if the chain breaks, that, we all suffer. Where does there's a scale there about how, and you got to decide that, but it's something that when it's in your plan and you point to the plan and you say, these are the values, is it clear or is it vague? So one of the big points in Plan 2040 is the community benefit. That is vague. Vagueness is something that the Supreme Court doesn't like. Okay? That's just a fact. If you want a community benefit, define what it is. And recently it's been housing. That's been the way the staff has written it, and I think you all have followed that. That's great. But it really needs to be in writing. Vagueness is something that leads to misinterpretations and people upset on both sides. If the rule is written clear, if you have to have a stream buffer of X, it's there or it's not. You either apply for a variance or you do it. When it's straightforward and you can read the rule and you can do it, then I think your community values are very clearly expressed, and you can expect those to be implemented. Some of our social values nationally are very hard to express without being vague. And I think that's where people struggle in every community to express what those values really are. Is it, and they'll be different depending on where you are in the country. You know, we don't worry about water very much here. My friends in Phoenix and Tucson worry about water a lot. You know, it's just what are your values and how do you express them? But you have to be able to express them clearly and succinctly in a way that an outsider can come in and read them and understand them. And that I just use that one, that's a lightning rod, I know, but that's one, you know, yes, we want the community to benefit from this development. Tell me how, if you give me the puzzle to solve, I'll solve the puzzle. But when the puzzle is an amoeba and it moves, I can never solve the puzzle. And that's really, I think, what people are asking for, is give them clear pieces to solve the puzzle. And, you know, it used to be, oh, your zoning code is 300 pages long. Well, nobody knows how long it is anymore because it's just on the internet. You know, but it should be hyperlinked. If there's a word here that relates to something in a section, you know, 100 pages away, I ought to be able to hyperlink between them and then go back quickly and easily. The hyperlinks ought to work, you know, your code ought to work so that I can understand it, and that if there's something in this part of the code that relates to part of the code over here, if there's not a hyperlink here, the way it is, I will never find that ever on the internet now, the way you go and read code. So they have to be very carefully linked together so that if I read, you know, R32 or whatever your code says, and there's a section that relates to how I landscape that over here, if it's not linked here, I might find it because I know I need to look for landscaping. But if it's, you know, I don't know, where I have to hide my trash cans, if there's not a link to that, I won't ever find that. And then Jeff's going to, you know, I'll get to Jeff and he'll say, well, you got to put your trash cans here or whatever, you know. So all that stuff has to work together. It's very hard. You've got a good code consultant. Elizabeth and I were interns at the same law firm a long time ago, so I know she does great work. But those are the kind of things that when you are trying to make things work efficiently and express your values, clarity and ease of use are very important.
I don't want to stop anything. I've let us run long. Did you get your?
Oh, yes, that was fine. I just, yeah.
I mean,
It's how you see them fitting together. So.
No, I think your values are very important, and I would never tell you to sacrifice your values because I won't sacrifice mine. So but you got to be able to express that very clearly.
Anyone else have questions for Rob?
I did, but are we trying to get something else done?
No, go ahead. You go ahead.
I don't have to be anywhere.
We do have till 9.
Okay. Oh, great.
Oh, okay. Just a comment, in listening to you talk, you mentioned that community benefit, which is something that's been, you know, talked about quite a little, but you also talked about, let's say, a developer wanting to have flexibility with a site. You know, mixed use, there could be a lot of things that could be there, it could be creative, what's a great project for the city. But I would argue that the community benefit probably allows that. I mean, in terms of, we're waiting for these projects to come in, and do they give a community benefit? And yes, it's not defined specifically, but that's what allows that creativity. You know, when a developer comes to, like, think about that. What could possibly be a community benefit? So I think in the sense of that being written like that, we're looking for some creativity and some benefit to the community. It might be something we've never thought of.
I think you can allow for that, but you can also make things that are specific. Say these are the things we would specifically allow. You may have another idea, but I think you can have both. I think you can be specific in what you think a community benefit would be, and I think you can also leave, you know, or some other alternative. It's like dumpster screening, right? We would prescribe that you had to have materials that match the main building and had to have doors that closed and X, Y, and Z with a dumpster screen. You know, how you do a dumpster screen. We say, but you can say, or a alternative, and they may come up with something that is completely different and, you know, you never thought of, and maybe it's all done by a berm and they, you know, it's all into the landscape. It's not directly landscape, but it's all hidden another way, but there's not really there's not a wall, there's not a, you know, there's not a wall to it, there's not a formal landscaping plan. It's just the streetscape kind of covers it, but it's not formally done. You know, I think that there are ways to say that, show us your long-term, you know, how we're going to maintain this long-term, and can we do that? Show us X, Y, or Z. And if you have another idea, we're happy to listen to it. But just know that, you know, we may not, if I choose as a developer to go with an unknown alternative, then I know that I am putting myself before you, and you can love me and parade me around on your shoulders, or you can nail me to the cross. I mean, I know that going in. And I might be able to talk to Jeff and get a good idea of like, hey, Jeff likes this idea, I like this idea. Between the two of us, maybe we can be persuasive enough to get this done. If Jeff looks at me funny, then I'm probably going to go back and do something else. I mean, you know, and as planning director, you have people ask you, it's like, they ask you, what do you think? Have other people gotten this done? Have other people gotten smacked for doing this? I mean, they ask a lot of questions of the planning director because there's nobody else in the city that's into development like the planning director is. And so, I mean, I think you can, I get that you want the creativity. I think you can allow for that, but if you deny somebody in the zoning process because of the lack of community benefit, and they say, I thought this was a community benefit, it was vague. Vagueness is something that gets judicial reviews antennas up quickly. And so that's, you know, it's just one of those things.
Just to remind the commission, the community benefit is related to the annexation of property, not to the zoning. So the golden factors are still what you would buy to the zoning criteria for that part.
And I was just going to ask a follow-up to that,
Yeah.
but if you had more.
Well, so, and Jeff's correct. The thing that complicates well, I think we just leave it at that. Go ahead with your question.
So I just wanted to kind of get an idea, or like a summary, or my takeaway. Are you saying that you feel like, or developers may feel like, there's some issues with the way that the zoning code is presented, like online, and a variety? It's hard to figure out exactly what should be done and whatnot, and there's some ambiguity then built into some of that, or is it a value set? Like, 'cause to me it seems like in the Plan 2040 and a variety of things, I mean, the value sets are pretty clear, right? Now, how we're going to execute them, right, or what kind of creative solutions may come up to like make the community that we're seeking for it to be, like, that's kind of up in the air, like, right? But the value set seems pretty clear to me there, and so I'm just curious as to, because I get a little bit of a sense of we're hard to work with. I'm not sure about that 100%, but like Douglas County might be difficult from the developer's perspective. So what do we do then, or what are you saying then is the way that we would be able to be less that way, but not compromise our values, which seem clearly set out to me?
I would say that the feeling that Lawrence is hard to work with is not completely universal, but fairly universal.
Would that be Lawrence or Douglas County? Are you talking about
Lawrence?
Okay.
And it's very hard to perceive how that is compared to other places. Now, a lot of it is speed of the process, and you know, there are, in most of the Johnson County communities, KCK, Lee Summit, Liberty, Independence, if I come in with a master plan amendment, change of zone, preliminary plan, preliminary plat, I should be through that process in 4 to 6 months universally, and then be ready to do my final plan, final plat. I think that's kind of the standard, that when people want to spend their money, you have Lawrence developers that are spending their money in other counties because of that process, of that, just of the timing. I think that, finding people that agree with your values and want to be here and be part of your community is important. The guy that wants to come in and make the quick buck, it's like the roofers after the storm that come in from other states, that's not the guy you want, but you can't really say that directly in some forums. But you want to be able to develop a cohort of people that want to work in your community, that understand it and know how to work that. I've had people in communities I worked in that were very successful, and they badmouthed us everywhere in the world because they wanted to be the only game in town. Okay? We had people that were just not very bright, that couldn't figure out the system, and badmouthed us. We had people that came in, so this is a funny story. We had 2 people that got plans, significant, complex construction documents approved on their first try. One of them was from California. You know why? They read the rules. Okay? I mean, that's very important. And we had a lot of people, when I managed review as part of my job, I had enough people to do review if we averaged 2.2 reviews per plan set. We averaged 3.2 per plan set. My people worked 60 to 70 hours a week. So it was important to get good plans. And so we wrote our rules to force good plans. And then we did good review, and we got good plans. And we got down to that I think the lowest we ever got for any period was like 2.1 reviews per plan set. So some of them would be 1 review, and most of them were 1 review and minor changes, and then go back. But brand new people should be able to come in and do it. But I will tell you, zoning is hard. I mean, you all are probably, of the commission, the top 20 most in the top 20 most knowledgeable people on zoning in the community, and quite frankly, you don't know very much about it, right? I mean, to be honest, it's not your job to know the zoning code. It was my job to know the KCK zoning code, and I had to go look stuff up every now and then. I would give my staff, there would be like, oh, we haven't had that before. All right, you all independently, I want everybody to go figure out what you think about that. We'll talk about it and come back. It's not easy. And when you have a new code, there's going to be a whole lot more of, because you can't go through you can do all the scenarios you want in the process. You're not, the first one that comes in is going to be something you never thought of. It's just the way that works. So, you got to do your best job to be clear, and you've got to understand what you want and what they want. And, there are always going to be people that come in and just say, I'm doing it my way and screw y'all. Either you want it or you don't. But when you find somebody that's like, they see our values, they see what we're doing, cultivate that, and keep them coming. And that's hard to find, but there's enough demand in Lawrence. You're going to find people that want to do that, want to keep doing that, and repeat that process. But Lawrence has a more structured value system than most communities do. And, the thing I would say is that those are great. They can make you very exclusive. Boulder was this in the 70s and 80s, right? And now there's, if you're not a college student living in a dorm, you cannot afford to live in Boulder. You have to live a long way away from Boulder. Other cities around on the Front Range are growing fast because people that work in Boulder live in those cities, right? And it's growing because they have mountains. We don't have mountains, so we don't have to worry about that. But you want to temper one with the other, right? You don't want bad development. You don't want stuff you're going to regret forever. You don't want to do no development and become so exclusive that people can't be part of your community, because part of your value system is the wide spectrum of people in the community, from a new artist to, a professor or somebody that starts up a new business that's going to be the next thing on the internet, whatever that is, And I think it's very hard to play those together, right? because the things that are nice in your value system are also expensive.
Excuse me, I have to leave, but I appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you for being here. And I can ramble and talk on a long time, so you got to stop me.
I think what I hear you say to the question, is there an ask of the development community, predictability, consistency?
Yep.
That's what it comes down to. Yeah.
And that's it's hard to achieve, and it takes building long-term relationships between consultants and staff. And as soon as I quit, I had people calling me, want me to help them right away, because they knew that I was willing to work in the system to make things happen within the system, and could make that happen in the system, because I'd done it for so long, and they perceived me as being fair. And even people that didn't get their developments approved, they thought that they weren't happy about it. It cost them a lot of money, but they didn't feel like they got an underhand kick in the shorts.
Coming up 6 minutes before the top of the hour. Mike, Prashanth, is it anything from you guys? Any questions or comments?
I have a quick one. Gary, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hey, Rob, thanks for doing this. I've learned a lot, and it's been very informative. So we're in the middle of writing regulations for wind turbines, and I was wondering if you could give us a sense of what you anticipate in terms of energy needs coming down the road. I know you mentioned 3,000 acre solar farm, I think, to support Panasonic. Any way for us to gauge what's coming from an energy perspective?
I don't think so. I think that there's even maybe a solar farm possibly being applied for in Douglas County as well.
There's talk of a project.
There's talk of a project that would do that. Wind is an interesting thing to me, because it's great for the environment and it ruins the environmental landscape. So I have a dilemma as an outdoors guy of driving across to Iowa. It's kind of Kansas isn't the flat state; it's really Iowa, right? I don't mind it so much there, but when you start driving in the mountains and they're on the ridges of the mountains and stuff, it has a different impact. But I don't think our energy needs are going to go away. The more we want to reuse batteries, the more we're going to need energy of one kind or another. I think we're probably all still afraid of nuclear stuff, and even though it's kind of in our backyard, we kind of forget about that. But and it doesn't appear that coal will ever be permitted again. So we're gonna have to look at other ways to do it as we move forward. So, but I'm not an energy predictor. Sorry.
Mr. Kelso.
My only comment, and this goes back to some of and thank you for coming. I agree with almost everything you said, except back to as one of the first things you said when you talked about rural and landowners, and the people made the comments like, we're never going to sell. We're never going to sell. And then you said, well, it'll get left to a child, and the child will say, okay, it can be sold. I'm going to disagree with that vehemently in this county. As a landowner, and I'm even a first-generation landowner, I'm going to die on my land, I'll tell you that right now. But to say that land can always be bought, that there's always a price no matter where it's at, I'm going to disagree with that. There's some very, very strong rural families in this county, particularly ones that are pretty close to Lawrence physically in their location. And that I married into one of those families, and that just through my mother-in-law passing, we've now inherited another 40 acres that's been in my wife's family for 4 generations, and I can tell you it's never going anywhere. And that's the only comment that I'd have.
Yeah, there are some that are like that. Very few, in my experience. Lawrence may be different.
And then also, the keeping the rural character fits, as has been said here, with the 2040 plan. I mean, we value that in this county.
At some point in the next few years, I'm going to inherit a farm, and my dad knows that it's gone because it's, 400 acres, or well, I guess my uncle sold his half, so 220, 230 acres, something like that. That makes $25,000 or $30,000 a year. Long-term savings account at 4.5% interest makes more money on that money than that does. And when you're looking at what you're, everybody values things differently, and that's your experience and is a unique one in the metro area as a whole. And maybe this is the place where all that is going to be centered, and that will stay that way forever. And if it does, you got to plan around that. And you need to recognize that as in doing your plans. And if that land is put into a trust of some kind where it will be farmland forever, then that changes how you plan for that.
Yeah.
If it's legally in a trust and it's preserved, then you might as well mark that as farmland forever, because that's the way it'll be. But that's not the
And I think we're seeing this as we go through, as Prasant mentioned, the rewriting of the wind regs. I mean, we're hearing from the landowners.
Yeah, I mean, when they offer you $75,000 a year to put for 5 turbines on your farm, it's hard to resist.
It is for some, not for others.
Some, not for others, agree.
Right,
And we've heard from both sides of that.
Right.
The multi-generational families that care for that land aren't doing a savings account.
They're not checking their money.
I'm not saying that they're oblivious to the economics of it. I think they probably are more closely attuned than everybody else is, but it's not the key decision criteria. And your point, though, is valid, that where that exists, where that's known, that should be factored into our plans, and not constantly be looking over to see if somebody's ready to sell. We should acknowledge that, maybe.
I can just tell you that my grandma would come out of her grave and slap me if I didn't take that contract. Even if it was right next to the house she was born in, that's still in the family. So, I mean, there's a difference. There's people looking at it differently, right?
Yeah, precisely. And we are out of time.
Just on time. Nice job.
Thank you all for having me and listening to me ramble.
Thanks so much for being here and for sharing a perspective from a developer's point of view and what's coming up with Panasonic, Rob. Appreciate you. Thank you. And we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No problem.
Nice.
It was, and just as an aside, when I was